My name's Jay Griffiths, and I'm a writer. I say it like that because I'm one of those lucky people that has always known their path in life. And it was something that I felt really, really, really young. I had one of my earliest memories is my mother reading to me just before I could read, and it was, and she was reading from this book. And then I asked her to, and I can see it exactly now. I can see the yellow cover, I can see the little red bits on the end pages, and I could see the letter of the title. And I said, "What's that?" And she read out the title of it. And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "That's the name of the author." And I said, "What's an author?" And she said, "It's the person that wrote the story." And I went, "Oh my God," because I thought they sort of pre-existed. And then it was like somebody saying, there are these things called gods. And I thought, to my little 4-year-old heart, I thought, I want to be a god. And then I said, "So what does it say?" And she said, and she spelled it out, E-N-I-D. How embarrassing is this? Enid Blyton, there we are. So that was one of my formative memories. But I have very seldom been thrown off that path in my life, although there are two things that will do it for me. One of them is Captain Alcohol, and the other one, even worse, is depression, because I've suffered terrible depressions in my life, and they can go on for months, and it is an agony that is almost unspeakable. You might possibly guess that I was a slightly difficult child to parent, certainly according to my parents. So they sent me off for quite a while before I went to school to my grandmother. And my grandmother, bless her sweet heart, really saw me, and that's one of the things that I'm sure loads of you remember from your own childhood, is that feeling that some adult somewhere just gets you. And I wrote a book for her, and it, rather embarrassingly, of course, it was about a cat. It was about my pet cat, and I sellotaped all the pages together and all the rest of it. But she took it with utter seriousness, and she looked at me, and she, because she was a very stern woman, she was a bit scary actually. But she looked at me with real seriousness and she said, "I really look forward to reading the first book that you get published." And it was like, that was it, you know, she saw me. And then when I was a bit older, she took me to Oxford. I was from a family where only one person in my family before me had been to university, and she took me to Oxford, and out of nowhere she said, "When you're older, you'll come here." And it was like absolute permission, and I just wish that every child had somebody who could do that for them, to say, this is what you can do, go for it. So I dreamt of being a writer when I was awake and asleep, because when I was a child I had a recurring dream. And in this dream, a world war was being played out around me. It was in black and white, of course, because all the war films that I'd seen were in black and white. The enemy had invaded. They were everywhere. But because I was a child, and even worse, I was a girl, nobody would take any notice of me. I grew up with 2 older brothers. So if you're the youngest and you're a girl, nobody really thinks that you matter. And this lack of importance is actually a massive strength. I could watch, I could see, I could listen, and I was never noticed. They just don't see you coming. It meant that I was used as a messenger in all of these dreams over and over again. I was given a message, take the message, listen to it, put it in your pocket, pass it on the right side. I could take a message right under the noses of enemy soldiers. They would never bother with me. I was just a girl. I could slip through any titchy gap in hedges, always beneath their gaze. It was interesting when I went to West Papua a few years ago, where, as you probably hopefully know, there's a genocide going on. And I spent a lot of time with Papuan people, and every once in a while I realized that the Indonesian military were following, and at one point there was a little line of them just standing like this in front of the hotel where I was staying, and I just kind of thought of that dream, and I thought, all I need to do is project the fact that I'm only a girl, I'm only small, I don't have tools, gear. I don't have cameras, I've just got one little black notebook, and I just smiled and went, hi, straight through. You can do that if you're a messenger sometimes. That sense of being close to the ground is really helpful. So what those dreams gave me was a really astonishing... I'm not going to talk about myself all the time, I just need all the people who are leaving, I just need to say that. What these dreams gave me was like a really astonishing prefiguring of my adult life, to be a messenger for the good. And it was a humble dream, because humility is a good thing for a messenger. You're close to the ground, you're close to the humus, the humility of the earth. You really can see better from below. But the most generous dream vision I ever had was in the Amazon. I'd gone there to dream, to be with the soñadores, the ayahuasqueros, primarily because I had been in this chasm of depression that was so severe, I'd worked out how I was going to kill myself, obviously, slit your wrists lengthwise in the bath. But instead, I got a phone call slightly out of the blue from an anthropologist called Jeremy Narby, whose work some of you may know, asking me to join him visiting shamans that he knew in the Peruvian Amazon. And I said yes immediately. It was the best decision, the fastest and the best decision I have ever made. When I was there, I knew a tiny bit about ayahuasca visions. I mean, really tiny. Snakes and plants and eyes and rivers. But I was entirely unprepared for the first visions that I had. It was like garish and cartoonish. They were a kaleidoscope of tourist shop junk. And I was living in London at the time, and it was kind of like all these kind of, you know, mugs with Union Jacks on, and these really silly plastic toys. Everything was giddy and repeating. And it was row on row of like fake London street names and tawdry key rings. There were cartoon traffic wardens with seaside postcard bottoms. In the middle of the Amazon, with the cicadas and the frogs honking and nothing around me but glistening forest, my own mind flung at me all the ugliness and stupidity of the city I'd left. It was like a kind of Xerox crazy paving, a zigzagging shopping arcade, jangling with sheer fertile banality. It was that blaring buzzing of nothing in a gridlocked triviality. I felt mocked by this. I felt, to be honest, rather humiliated. And as a plant teacher, this was my first lesson. Face the fact that your own mind is brimful of utter shitty nonsense. Face your civilization, the dream seemed to say. I was really embarrassed by my own mind. But that in itself was very helpful. One of the things that I felt very quickly with ayahuasca visions was that I was learning about learning. I was thinking about thinking. It was about mindedness. It was about consciousness within myself and outside. Because the Western way of knowing has denied validity to every mind save its own. Socrates, pithily summing up an entire way of thinking, said, "I am a lover of learning. And trees and open country won't teach me anything, whereas men in town do." There we are. We've been told. Descartes said grimly that the aim of knowledge was to be masters and possessors of nature. You can get a bit sick of Descartes, can't you? Rationalism demanded superiority to and separation from nature and nature's ways of knowing. The primacy given to literacy and the superior quality ascribed to the written text over spoken words has deafened us to the other voices and persuaded us that our meanings are the only ones that matter. I realise the irony, of course, being a writer and reading this all out to you. But so rooted is the idea that nature is stupid that one word for idiot is natural, a-natural. Words for wisdom in the thesaurus include virtually no natural reference, whereas synonyms for fool include ass, donkey, goat, goose, owl, cuckoo, greenhorn, calf, colt, buzzard, clodpole, clod, clodhopper, bullcalf, bullhead, mooncalf. In the Amazon, it is not so. The Amazon forest itself, according to a Dasana elder, the forest is a wide expanse similar to a perceptive human head. Here it is, telluric thought, sunk deep in the earth, a wild way of knowing so utterly different from the West that while we use the term vegetable for a comatose mind and vegging out as a slang term for mindless laziness, in the Amazon the wisest men and women are called vegetalistas, plant experts, steeped in plant knowledge. But there's more. People don't just learn about plants, they learn from these plant teachers or doctores, or grandmothers, of course, as I learned so much from mine. These doctores which teach people medicine. This is obviously a contradiction in terms to the Western mind, but to the shamans who use it, the vine is a wild intelligence of a vegetable kind. Once in another part of the Amazon, drinking ayahuasca with a shaman, I saw like a circle of speaking leaves on my head, and the shaman interpreted as an image of apprenticeship. The plants would speak, and I must learn. When I was there, one of the shamans, called Juan, was lying injured in a pallet in his house because a few weeks previously, he said he'd stepped off a path and straight into a trap set by a hunter. His leg had been splintered, he'd lost a lot of blood, he'd actually nearly died. And he interpreted his accent metaphorically. He'd strayed a little way off his path in life. Shamans say that ayahuasca shows you your path, not the path, but your own. And it is a songline of sorts, not as a map of the land, but a map of your life. The songline can simplify the riddles of your life and show you the way deep in the green heart's forest. What I found in my time with these shamans was that I was shown my path, or rather re-shown it, the same but deeper. Be a better messenger. Write this, the forest said, be a messenger for the sheer, teeming, vital vitality of the Amazon. Be in service to this. And the vehemence of that message was absolutely unmistakable. Suicide is a fucking luxury. Do your job. Take a message. I took the hint. When I was there, one of the things that I came to love was the songs that the shamans sing. One of them clearing his throat and spitting, and there in the hollow knock of phlegm in a bucket, a song lies like a blind seed in the hot silence, for a while unsung, and then from the shadows you hear a tiny leaf sprout of song. All the songs, the Icaros, seem sung in the key of green. They're so strongly suggestive of plants that I felt myself plant-like, rooted in brown leaf mold, thirsty for the sun. Each plant, say shamans, has its own song, and to learn about and to use that plant, you must learn its song. And those songs come to you in dreams, an Atwa shaman told me. They are a guide, a map of, not of landscape, but of knowledge-scape. Indigenous cultures know how to think the forests. They know that the paths through this so-called wilderness are songs, the songs that each plant has. Each song tells of one plant's relationship to the other plants and differentiates not only one plant from another, but distinguishes between the uses of, for example, the stem or the leaf or the root of the same plant. There is no divide, I felt. No divide between the song and the plant and myself. There's no hierarchy either. One of the things that, along with many people, I felt strongly in these ayahuasca trances was that melting sense of utter equality, that ecocratic feeling. The same life force is in everything, animating you and the sparrow, the glossy leaf and the kingfisher, the jaguar. The difference between creatures is just a trick of the light. It's a superficial thing, because underneath we're all made of the same stuff, that immanent energy, the one life force expressing itself in different guises. For Amazonian people, this knowledge comes from communicating with the wild world through its plant teachers, or through shapeshifting, that strange, beautiful, and entirely wild way of knowing. Creatures, I was told in the Amazon, are gente. They're people like us. They have customs and homes. They need to be accorded gentleness. You must address the world gently. Even to the wind, I was told, you must speak con cariño, with tenderness. Animals must be treated kindly, even in hunting, for their kin to humans. The Harakambut people told me all animals were people, Masaya, long ago. And there is that profound equality between us and them. They are like a distant family, and one has duties and expectations as you would with family members. People are familiar with the habits and ways of animals, can talk to them, and this familiarity is cherished. By contrast, in the West, historically, close familiarity with animals was considered devilish, the witch and her familiar. But the history of Europeans' actions in the Amazon, their murders and extinctions and loggings and land thefts, is a demonstration of radical unkindness and the unmaking of the wild. So it disintegrates into a wasteland, empty of life, and never more horribly than in Brazil at the moment. Behind those actions is the Western philosophy of a terrible unkindness, the idea that the human animal is a different kind of creature, separate from others. Because we are, every one of us, no less wild than the animals. It's just that most of the time we forget that wild spirit, allow it to be smothered. Non-shamanic cultures, I've got 10 minutes. Non-shamanic cultures forget the most, and this forgetting is a terrible loss, for we are wild in claw and feather, in glide and pounce and fury. When Europeans invaded the world, what they termed the discovery of the world, there were false claims that knowledge increased in that era. It did not. The truth was the opposite. For destroying human cultures and animals' habitat, there was in fact a net reduction in the world's knowledge. One of the things that Vandana Shiva said, which I particularly like, she said, from the forests we learnt democracy, that every species has its place, because democracy, as increasingly we're coming to realize, has no meaning if we don't count the entirety of life on Earth, down to the last plant. It's falsely attributed to the ancient Greeks, but Native Americans and other indigenous people were practicing it generations before in that ecocratic wisdom. Luther Standing Bear writes, the Indian gave to all creatures equal rights with himself. The Shipibo people in Peru say we believe that animals are our equals. And then in the famous example from the Oneida Indians who, when they moved into a new territory that was lived in by wolves at a council meeting, said, we always need to have somebody to speak. We always ask who speaks for wolf. And in this time of ecological crisis, the silencing of the voices of the more than human world, the wolves, the bears, the bees and the worms, the moths, the wasps and the elephants, their very silencing is compelling us humans to speak for them. The vision that I had in the Amazon that has stayed with me the most started like a waking dream. And in this dream, I could see the high street in Oxford, where I did go to university there, with people milling up and down. And at first I thought, oh, this is going to be another one, like these images of London and the kind of, you know, all the tat from tourist shops. But then I saw a jaguar in the middle of the street. It was a female adult jaguar, a wildcat pacing past the Queen's Lane coffee shop. Everyone else was scared of it and ran away, but I wasn't frightened. I actually felt drawn to it. I felt a kinship with it. I recognized it as if we were from the same tribe. And I approached it slowly, coming closer and closer. That jaguar light was shining in its eyes, and I stared, mesmerized. I was drawn to it as if it was my teacher, and I urgently wanted to learn from it. I am the the jaguar's apprentice. That thought came to me clearly in Spanish and in English. I was drawn to what it could teach me, so compelled that I felt myself dissolving, melting into it slowly. The boundaries of person and jaguar are permeable, I found, and I wasn't surprised. I was still me, but now in a different form or shape. This was shapeshifting. I knew the term, but I never thought I'd experience the feeling. At one level, and only dimly, I was aware it was a hallucination, but underneath all that, I felt it was true. It had a slanted, metaphoric truth. I felt a wild empathy, and so much did I feel a rapport with this animal that what was I and what was she were indistinct. I felt like her inside me, and then that feeling grew more intense, more vigorous, more violent, and what was inside began expressing itself outwardly. I felt as if I had whiskers, twitching, tense, and alert. I felt as if I had a tail, and it was switching back and forth in slow anger. I could put my front paw in my mouth and tug out a thorn from between a claw and a paw pad, and as I prowled, I could feel the folds of pelt ruck up under my armpits. My paws were soft and sensitive, and I could walk silently without shifting a stone. I smelt everything, noticed, watched, and heard everything. People had fled. The high street was deserted. I was stalking something by scent. Not the scent of a creature, rather it was the scent of anger. It was the trail of an injustice, and I was prowling with a fury far older than me, far larger than my individual concerns. I could smell myself. I plunged my nostrils deep towards the fur of my groin, and I sniffed up the satisfying, heady musk of wild female jaguar. And I roared a ferocious roar of wild and perfect contempt. I felt an untetherable rage at the Bodleian, which houses with such care all the dry knowledge of years while the Amazon burns. The wet and current knowledge of the forest mind is disrespected by the dry academies of science, even while indigenous knowledge is stolen for profit. The West's intellectual apartheid, which refuses to recognize indigenous wisdom even as it steals it, made me livid. Oxford then was my university, but I was now apprenticed to a jaguar, and out of revenge for centuries of wrong, I stalked through the Bodleian and I prowled its stacks and shelves, growling and snorting people away like dry, dead leaves. I came across a couple making love in an unsupervised room, and I purred them on. I went to the Radcliffe Camera, the centre of Western learning, and I paused a moment at the threshold. This was the heart of the epistemology which bred me, the horses of instruction. But I returned to it in the form of a jaguar from the Amazon, the tiger of wrath. And I stalked in and roared in the very heart of the building, roaring in anger and disgust about how my culture can know so little for knowing so much. And then the vision faded. "Are you okay?" one of the shamans asked me. "Estoy en otro mundo." I said, "I am in the other world." I've never forgotten that wild apprenticeship by which I began to feel for myself how a jaguar might sense things, how its body might feel and react. It was a sensual knowledge, an emotional one, carnal knowledge, a very feral way of knowing. And this is a touchstone for me now. It's both a sustaining source, a source of strength, and also a kind of forest conscience in me. It leaves me profoundly in tune with what is required of us in this time of crisis. We humans from the dominant culture have got to listen to indigenous culture and to the trees, to the medicine of ayahuasca, to mushroom knowledge. It also leaves me with an unshakable sense of the need to see my life as being in service to something far, far beyond myself. And this is exactly what drew me a few months ago to Extinction Rebellion. The call, the clear call to those abstract nouns, service, honor, duty, they're very old-fashioned. They are utterly, utterly vital. Also the clarification, eco, not ego. And I feel that exile's demands are not unlike the demands of the forest. It is a kneeling thing. There is something of chivalry in it. And there is an awful lot of humility. Stay close to that humus, the earth itself. Lie on the earth. Put your ear to it. Sing in tune with it. Because what we all know when there are wildfires in the Arctic, when Wales, where I live, straight after the April Rebellion, and I got back home and there were wildfires just a few miles from my house, we know collectively we've stepped off the path. And what I want to say is I've spent 30 years in different kinds of protest, mostly through writing, but different kinds of protests that I've seen and been a part of. And what I feel is that we have never, ever had a chance like Extinction Rebellion is giving us. Because what it's doing is it's using ancient wisdoms. It's also using the absolute cutting edge of the best of what we have now in terms of technology and communications. Its appeal is absolutely remarkable, and its breadth is breathtaking. And so if this is a plea for anything right now, it isn't the usual author's plea, which is, please buy my book, because I really don't care about that so much. What I would really say is, if you're not already a part of Extinction Rebellion, could you just look it up? Could you find your local group? And if there isn't a local group, you can make it yourself, because this is a moment where we absolutely have to stand up for something. We have to stand up for something. Silence in this era is a betrayal. Thank you.